two verses from the first reading as they are translated or paraphrased in the Message. Moses said, "Look what I've done for you today. I've placed in front of you life and good, death and evil, and I command you today, love God, your God. Walk in God's ways. Keep God's commandments, regulations, and rules, so you will live. Really live. Live exuberantly, blessed by God, your God, in the land you are about to enter." Let us pray. Speak to us now, Holy One, through words that are both ancient and modern. Give them new life and new relevance for our lives as we live them in these days. In your many names we pray. Amen. Well, in today's first lesson, we hear what are the most familiar verses in Moses' closing speech to the Hebrews. He has led them out of Egypt, across the Red Sea, and for 40 years in the wilderness. And here they are, finally, at the edge of the Jordan, waiting to enter the Promised Land. Moses is not going with them, but he is about to turn his leadership over to Joshua. Joshua will take them across the Jordan into the Promised Land. So this is Moses' valedictory address. He is exhorting the people to follow the commandments of God, to obey God in their new land, this land which he knows will be filled with foreign gods and other principles that would tempt them to forget the life-giving laws of God. "See, I have set before you life and death, blessings and curse. Choose life." Now, I guess I probably preached on this text at least 100 times over the years. But as I read it, preparing for tonight, something occurred to me for the first time. Choose life. Now, who would choose death? I mean, isn't this sort of a redundant thing to say? Well, I suppose maybe you might. There was an older woman who was a true saint. Toward the end of her life, her health began to fail, and they took her to the hospital, and she didn't want to go. And so the nurse saw that she was not happy about being in the hospital, so she sent for the chaplain. And we chaplain types are always glad to be of some use, especially in a hospital where the doctors and nurses are actually the useful ones. And so this rather jovial fellow burst right into the room and, without even knowing the woman's name, began to beseech God to heal her. Without hesitating, the old woman smacked the chaplain right in the forehead and said, "Stop that. I was almost home." She wasn't interested in choosing to continue the life she knew right then. So I suppose there may come a time for most of us that when death would be our choice at the end of our life. I doubt that time is today for most of us. Most of us don't need encouragement to choose life over death. But what Moses is saying is that lots of the small choices we make, the small decisions we make, take us in the wrong direction, take us toward death rather than toward life. The spirit of death can manifest itself in many ways and does so in much of our culture. In modern America, it is obvious that our gun culture is a choice favoring death. Our modern predatory economics, our destructive attitude toward God's creation, our punitive penal system, our for-profit health system, the dysfunction of our politics, and so forth. These all seem to be societal choices we made that move us toward a spirit of death. Moses knew that the idols of death can be powerful things. We worship money and we become greedy. We worship power and we become corrupt. We worship another individual and we become codependent. As Ralph Waldo Emerson explained, that which dominates our imaginations and our thoughts will determine our life and our character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful what we worship. For what we are worshiping, we are becoming. What we worship, we become. What a powerful warning. That's why during 2020, we are working to see ourselves and our church through the eyes of God. It is God who created us and breathed life into us, who from the very moment of the beginning of creation was biased toward us in favor of life. It is also God who sent the prophets like Moses and Jesus to help us see life. See the life God has placed before us. Both Moses and Jesus, in the lessons we heard today, talk about the commandments as a path toward life. Now, the problem is that too often we think of commandments as ancient rules to make us behave one way or another, to control us. But that's how the scribes and Pharisees saw the law. Jesus came to try to help us see it another way, to make another point about it. Repeatedly in the passage you heard today, Jesus said, you have heard it said, but I say to you. Now, if you just a superficial reading of this gospel lesson today might make you believe that Jesus was taking the law and making it stricter, more difficult, tougher even to follow. But I don't think this is true. And it becomes clear to us with the one law that kept getting Jesus into trouble. During Lent, which begins in about 10 days, we are inviting all of us to experiment with practicing Christianity, to experiment with the practices of Christianity. For example, I'm going to invite you one Sunday to experiment with prayer. And maybe we can begin to learn how to be people of prayer without succumbing to magical thinking. We're going to ask everyone to try for 40 days tithing, to experiment with unreasonable generosity for 40 days to see if we might become more grateful, generous, gracious people. One of the Sundays during Lent, I am preaching about how we can experiment with keeping Sabbath. Now, this was the rule that kept getting Jesus into trouble, you recall. He kept healing people on the Sabbath, and they would wag their fingers at him. No, no, no. Yet, Jesus understood the principle of Sabbath. And if you watch his life, as it's recounted in the Gospels, you see this rhythm. You see that he has discovered the principle which kept him sane and rooted, even when life around him was pretty crazy. Jesus said the Sabbath was given to keep us. We weren't given to keep the Sabbath. And that's what he's trying to say in the gospel lesson about all of these principles. These are not rules for you to keep. These are principles that can keep you in the sacred path toward life. Today, we are bearing witness to what happens when basic moral principles and standards are flaunted and disregarded. Civil society cannot endure without respect for the rule of law and a mutual agreement that it applies to us all. There are not enough police in the world to even enforce the traffic laws if we all decide they don't apply to us. Imagine the chaos. Children follow rules because they are rules. But adults, mature people, understand the principles beneath the rules to be enriching and life-giving. Principles like honesty, civility, decency, integrity, and sanctity. These must be the principles that guide our vision of life, especially life together. Our nation's founders and the founders of our faith understood this. Now, I'd be perfectly happy to spend the rest of the evening railing against what is going on in our country and in many churches that call themselves Christian, how they violate these core principles. But I suspect there is probably more beneficial ways to spend this short amount of time we have together. In fact, on this President's Day Sunday, maybe we can figure out a way that these principles can be beneficial to us and through us. We can grow angry and frustrated and depressed about what's going on, or we can hear the voice of the Spirit of life saying, "This is what you were made for. This is an opportunity for you to practice your faith. This is a chance for you to live out your witness as followers of the way of Jesus. This is your chance to become all you were created to be. You were made for this moment. This is your time to choose the path of life and to become a life-giving force set loose by God in the world. If we do not, what is the course of life for humanity? Shall we complain or withdraw? That is the choice of death. But there is a better choice. Edwina Gatley, in her book, "There Was No Path, So I Trod One," wrote this point: we are called to say yes. That is the kingdom that might break through, to renew and to transform our dark and groping world, that honeysuckle may twine and twist its smelling leaves over the graves of nuclear arms. We are called to say yes, that black may sing with white and pledge peace and healing for the hatred of the past. We are called to say yes, that nations may gather and dance one great movement. No, we stutter and we stammer to the lone God who calls us and pleads a new Jerusalem in bloody Sinai Straits. We are called to say yes, for the joy of humankind. We are called to say yes to a God who still holds fast to a vision of the kingdom for a trembling world of pain. And we are called to say yes to this God who reaches out and asks us to share this amazing dream of love. Maybe she is capturing what Jesus meant at the end of our gospel lesson today. He said to us, we shouldn't swear. Doesn't mean we shouldn't curse, though maybe we shouldn't do that either. It means we shouldn't have to swear. Our yes should be sufficient. Our no should be sufficient. Yes and no should be sufficient. Because we are living by the principles of God. Integrity, civility, mutuality, decency, confidence. If you live that way, your yes is enough. Rachel Corey died on March 25th, 2003. She was 23 years old, crushed to death by a bulldozer as she stood in front of a Palestinian home that was about to be destroyed by the Israeli military. Although she was wearing an orange vest and had been standing there for 3 hours, the report said she was accidentally knocked down, covered with dirt, and repeatedly run over. Israeli authorities said, quote, "This is a regrettable incident where a group of protesters were acting irresponsibly." I disagree. I believe Rachel was acting out of the responsibility that comes to all followers of the way of peace and life, choosing integrity, dignity, compassion, and justice. Rachel was not acting irresponsibly. She was taking responsibility for her Palestinian sisters and brothers. Jesus said, "Those who love their life will lose it, but those willing to lose it for my sake will find it." She chose to follow the way of Jesus. And though she died, yet she still lives on. What else does it mean to take up your cross and follow Jesus? Well, as Lent approaches, my prayer today is that Rachel might inspire us all to have the courage to choose the difficult path that is life.